It all started on a chilly Monday morning. The school corridors were echoing with laughter, chatter, and the occasional sound of sneakers squeaking on the polished floors. The bell hadn't rung yet, but most students had already crowded inside, grouping up like flocks of birds. But while the noise swirled around like a hurricane, one boy walked quietly, unnoticed, untouched by the chaos. His name was Ruhan. Ruhan was always the one sitting at the last bench, sketching in his notebook while others joked around. He never interrupted, never talked back, and barely looked people in the eyes. If someone passed by and dropped his books, Ruhan would bend down, pick them up, and smile faintly. He was polite. Too polite. And in the twisted world of school bullies, that made him a target. "Yo! Watch it, silent monk," a loud voice barked as Ruhan accidentally brushed shoulders with Veer, the self-proclaimed king of the school. Veer wasn't alone, he never was. Behind him stood his usual gang. Arman with his cocky grin, Danish with his phone always ready to record, and Sahil, the muscle with nothing to say but always ready to act. Ruhan paused, turned, and said softly, "Sorry." Veer smirked. "Sorry? What are you sorry for, huh? Trying to sneak attack me?" His voice was loud enough to attract a small circle of students. That was his game, humiliate first, record later. Ruhan shook his head and started walking again, not wanting any trouble. But that only triggered them more. "He thinks he's better than us." Arman laughed. "Let's see what he hides behind that silence," Sahil muttered and stepped forward, pulling Ruhan's bag off his shoulder. It dropped with a thud. The quiet boy turned around, his eyes wide but not angry. Just tired. Tired of this happening again. He bent down slowly to pick up his bag, but just as he did, Veer stepped closer. And in one swift, humiliating move, Veer yanked Ruhan's hair hard from behind. "Oi! Say something now, girl boy." Veer laughed. Everyone gasped. Laughter erupted. Phones were lifted. Someone shouted, "He pulled his hair like he was a doll." But that's when it happened. Ruhan stood up, slowly, like the moment before a storm hits, and turned around. His face didn't show pain. It didn't even show fear. His expression was calm, unreadable. But his eyes had changed. "Don't do that again," he said quietly, like the final warning before something breaks. Veer chuckled. Or what? The next second passed like lightning. Ruhan grabbed Veer's wrist, twisted it sideways, and before Veer could even react, he was flipped flat on his back with a loud thud in front of everyone. Gasps echoed down the hallway. Veer's gang froze. So did the entire crowd. Before anyone could move, Arman lunged at Ruhan, but Ruhan sidestepped, grabbed his hoodie from the back, and spun him into the lockers. The metal clanged like thunder. Sahil, the biggest one, charged in brute force, but Ruhan crouched low and, with a perfectly timed sweep kick, brought him crashing down on his back. 3 boys. Down in under 5 seconds. Danish stood there, phone in hand, his face pale. He pressed record, but his hands were shaking. He didn't know whether to run or film or apologize. The hallway was silent now. You could hear the breath of every single student as they stared at the boy they had ignored for years. "I told you, don't do that again," Ruhan said. He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He just turned, picked up his bag, and walked off. Word spread like wildfire. By the time the next period started, the whole school knew what had happened. The quiet boy flipped Veer. He's a ninja. He was trained. Rumors grew fast, but no one really knew the truth. What they didn't know was that Ruhan had been training in martial arts since he was 6. His father, a former soldier and sensei, had taught him discipline, strength, and most importantly, patience. His silence was never weakness. It was restraint. Back in class, Ruhan sat quietly at the back as always, but the air around him had changed. People stole glances at him. Girls whispered. Even the teacher paused when he walked in, as if sensing the shift. But Ruhan didn't care for the attention. He just opened his notebook and began sketching again. This time, he drew 3 figures lying on the ground. Above them, a boy standing, silent, peaceful, strong. But the story wasn't over. Veer wasn't the kind to accept defeat. That flip shattered his ego and bruised his body. And what happens when an arrogant bully feels small? He plans revenge. The next day, a new plan was already brewing. They thought it was over. They thought the flips were the end of it. But when pride is hurt and power is taken away in public, bullies don't give up, they plot. And this time, Veer was out not just to humiliate Ruhan, but to destroy him. What Ruhan didn't know was that the real battle was yet to begin. And it would test more than just his strength, it would test his control, his past, and his heart. It had only been 24 hours since the whole school witnessed Ruhan flipping 3 of the strongest boys to the floor like paper dolls. The incident was shared in group chats, posted anonymously on story pages, and whispered about in the canteen. Even the teachers were walking on eggshells. No one had expected the silent kid who never raised his voice to be that fast, that skilled, that dangerous. But Ruhan didn't change. He still walked quietly, smiled politely at staff, and took his seat at the last bench. When someone asked, "Yo, Ruhan, where did you learn that?" he simply said, "I trained." When someone else joked, "Hey, teach me too, master," he nodded, but didn't laugh. He didn't need attention. He didn't want it. But attention doesn't ask permission. And revenge doesn't need a reason. Veer hadn't returned to school the next day. Rumor had it he went to the hospital. Nothing serious, just bruised bones and shattered pride. But what Veer returned with was much worse. 3 days later, he walked into school with a black hoodie, sunglasses, and a bruised ego barely hidden behind fake confidence. But something was different. He wasn't alone. A new boy walked beside him. Bigger. Bulkier. Silent. The moment they stepped into the hall, whispers started flying again. "That's his cousin," someone said. "No, that's a kickboxer from his gym." "Bro, that guy bench presses humans." The new guy's name was Imran. A final year student who had dropped out the previous year due to disciplinary issues. In truth, Imran had been expelled after hospitalizing a fellow student in a boxing match gone wrong. But Veer had pulled strings to bring him back for one mission only: teach Ruhan a lesson he wouldn't forget. Lunchtime arrived. Ruhan was sitting under the tree at the far end of the playground, sketching as always. But this time, he wasn't drawing flips. He was drawing memories. A child sitting on his father's lap, being taught how to balance on one leg. "Power is not in punches, Beta," his father used to say. "It's in patience. Break someone's nose, and you win the fight. But control your anger, and you win yourself." Those words echoed in Ruhan's head like a prayer. He missed his father. It had been 2 years since he passed away. A heart attack. Sudden. Silent. Just like Ruhan had become. But peace doesn't last in stories like this. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Ruhan looked up and saw Veer walking toward him, followed by Imran and the rest of the gang. A small crowd began to gather again. Phones were already out. "This ends today, hero," Veer said. Ruhan closed his sketchbook and stood up slowly. "What do you want now?" Veer smirked. "A rematch. You embarrassed me. In front of everyone. This time, let's make it fair." Ruhan shook his head. "There's nothing fair in what you're doing." Imran stepped forward. His knuckles cracked. His chest bulged like a wall of bricks. "You scared of someone your own size?" he growled. Ruhan exhaled. "I'm not here to fight." "That's good," Veer said. "Because he is." Without warning, Imran charged. But Ruhan was ready, not because he wanted to fight, but because years of training had made him always prepared. Imran's punch flew forward, heavy like a truck, but Ruhan ducked, stepped sideways, and used Imran's own momentum to toss him off balance. He didn't attack. He didn't hit. He just defended. But Imran wasn't stopping. Again and again, he swung, roared, and launched kick after kick. And again, Ruhan blocked, dodged, deflected, like water flowing around fire. Students were screaming now, some cheering, some frozen. But no teacher came. No adult intervened. It was like time had paused and this was a ring no one dared step into. Finally, one of Imran's punches grazed Ruhan's jaw. Just barely. But enough to bring out something Ruhan had buried deep. He stepped back. Took a breath. His chest rose and fell like a wave. And in that moment, a flash of his father's funeral ran through his mind. How he stood silent, not crying. How his fists clenched but never struck anything. How he swore never to misuse his strength. Ruhan closed his eyes. Imran ran forward, screaming. And then, it happened. One perfect move. Ruhan stepped inside the punch, spun, and flipped Imran so hard the ground shook. Dust rose. Silence fell. Imran didn't move. Ruhan stood over him and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This isn't power. This is restraint." Veer's mouth was hanging open. Danish had dropped his phone. Arman whispered, "Bro," he flipped him. Ruhan looked at Veer and said calmly, "It's over. Let it go." But Veer wasn't done. "Why? You think you've won? Just because you fight well," he shouted. "You're still a nobody. No one talks to you, no one likes you. You're still invisible." Ruhan smiled. And then, finally, he said something none of them expected. "I was never invisible. You just never looked." Then he walked away. That day, the principal called an emergency assembly. Veer and his gang were suspended for a week. Imran was permanently removed. But Ruhan was called to the stage. Not for punishment, but for respect. He didn't gloat. He didn't brag. He just stood there and said, "Don't mistake quiet for weakness. Sometimes, the loudest power is in silence." The hall erupted in applause. Weeks passed. Ruhan became somewhat of a legend. Students approached him not out of fear, but respect. Even teachers started treating him differently. But what mattered most was that he hadn't broken his promise. He had never hit first. He had never hurt out of anger. He had flipped the world around him by staying true to who he was. And one day, as he sat again under that same tree, sketching peacefully, a group of kids approached. Younger ones. "Sir," one of them said shyly, "can you teach us how to defend ourselves? Like you?" Ruhan looked up, smiled, and nodded.